Welcome to ABA Inside Track. It's like reading in your car, but safer. I am not your regular host. I'm the cool substitute co-host. It's Jackie with my other co-host.
It's me, Diana. Hi.
Hey there, everyone.
You just have us two today. We're switching it up. Yep.
Girl squad, girl squad, girl squad, girl squad. It is Girl Squad for September. We had a September preview for Girl Squad, and now we're having a Girl Squad episode. Really excited about this one. And so, yeah, it's different but new and exciting.
Yep, totally. We are here in the middle of Supervision September, correct? Yeah, which is one of our favorite months. And this week, we are going to talk to you all about teaching your supervisees to engage in compassionate care practices. So this hits, what do people say? It ticks a lot of the boxes, right?
It sure does, yeah.
If you've been listening to as much British podcasting as I have, then you might also feel like it ticks a lot of the boxes in terms of talking about supervision. And we're also going to talk about compassionate care practices, which is a very important and of the moment topic as well. Should I go ahead and tell you what articles we're going to review?
Why not?
Today?
We're just moving into it.
I don't really see any reason why not to. Let me just locate those. Okay. So we have 2 articles we're really going to talk about today, and then one that we will kind of gravy it up with here at the end. Those 3 articles are a preliminary analysis of the effects of clicker training and verbal instructions on the acquisition of relationship building skills in 2 applied behavior analysis practitioners. That was by Cannon and Gould and published in Behavior Analysis and Practice 2022. Also, Teaching Compassion Skills to Students of Behavior Analysis, a preliminary investigation by Rohr and Weiss and published in Behavior Analysis and Practice 2023. And then also, finally, a multi-level framework for compassionate care in ABA, approaches to cultivate a nurturing system by Denegri, Simbal, and Catrone. And that was in Behavior Analysis and Practice, also 2023.
That's pretty fun. They're pretty new and relevant, right? Because this is a new and relevant topic.
Exactly. Yes. This is one of those areas where we say, where's the research? We want to see more research. And it is starting to come out more and more so. And that is, I think, reflective of just how long it takes to conduct research, right? Because this has certainly been a topic that many people have been interested in our field. I feel like there's kind of been a renewed interest in the last 5 years, right? And more discussion on how are we going to ensure that we're engaging in compassionate care practices, and then therefore, how are we going to teach our supervisees and our trainees to engage in those practices as well. Although this as a topic has been rooted and integral to our field from the beginning. We've talked about this in the past. We talked about social validity practices and how we want to ensure that the services that we're providing to our clients are meaningful, effective, and valid for them. And all of that's going to get wrapped up in the delivery of those services and ensuring that we're providing that delivery in a compassionate way.
One thing I really love is in the past, we have talked about compassionate care articles in terms of more the grandiose theoretical articles. And these are like data driven. They are actual research studies where people potentially learn things.
Exactly.
Right?
Because that's how it always goes, right? Is first you get all of the highfalutin articles where people say, this is what we should be doing in our field. It's super important. And then we talk about whatever, right? We talk about cultural responsiveness, or we talk about compassionate care. We talk about soft skills, right? Like we've talked about all of these things. And those types of episodes, we always say, yes, of course, these are all the things we want to say, but how do we actually do it? How do we implement it? And how do we know if what we're doing is going to be effective and have the outcomes that we're looking for? Which is kind of like the progression here. So it starts theoretical, then we start to look at how we might teach these. And then after that, ideally, then we can look at what are the outcomes and is this measuring what we, measuring what we want it to measure.
I love
teaching
that.
what we wanted to teach. Yes.
Yeah.
So I feel like we're kind of like in the midst of all of that right now. And totally, the 2 articles that you and I are going to review here are going to give us some like actual hard and fast data on how we might operationally define some of these skills, how you might measure these skills, and therefore how we could teach these skills to up and coming folks in the field.
I just want to say it's freaking hard.
It is, yes.
Freaking hard. Because unlike previous research when you have more of a defined behavior, like these are so complex repertoires where it will combine a lot of different things that may need to shift and change depending on the context of the situation that you're in. And so that I just find it so fascinating that someone's like, I'm going to take this on. Whereas when I'm looking at it, I'm like, this is terrifying, needed, but terrifying, right? Because just that first step of creating an operational definition seems so vast.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And our articles speak to that as well. They talk about like how this is going to change situationally, how you might need to define some of these things and what are going to be the relevant components that are going to come into play at any given moment in time. Other fields have also looked in this area as well. So we're not alone here. We're kind of coming, we always want to be like the last people into the crowded party. I feel I'm talking about
Everybody
these types of soft skills.
Yeah.
Hey guys, we're here. What are you doing?
You're like, we've been waiting for you.
Exactly. Yeah. So there is research out there in, the nursing realm, in the physician's realm, in the clinical psychology realm, in the counseling realm to talk about how we might approach providing services with empathy. I think as behavior analysts, we do bring our own important perspective here, which is we want to operationally define these behaviors in such a way that we feel satisfied with them from a behavioral perspective. So the existing research out there, not all of it, but a lot of it is looking more so at some types of questionnaires, right, or surveys to try to get at whether there are empathy skills that are being taught and or services are being provided via a compassionate, empathetic way. And those are important too, but they, as a behavior analyst, we want to look at things like a little bit differently, right? We want to say, well, how can we all agree? You might think you're providing an empathetic service, but is someone who's on the receiving end going to feel that way about it? Or am I going to observe it as being empathetic? And these aren't outside of the realm of things that we can operationally define. We just have to think about it and do a good, solid job of defining all of the components of what those compassionate skills
are. Those are really going to be... Oh, yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
That's it.
Those are really going to be like shower thoughts, before bed thoughts, like middle of the nights write downs, right? Like this is not going to be like, oh, I'm just going to write it down and it'll be great. This is like going to have to require probably a lot of revision and thoughtfulness and other people's perspective too, which I love.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. I also think that it's important that we acknowledge that other fields have come before us in paving the way in this process, right? Because time and again, we say, oh, as behavior analysts, we didn't get any of this training in our graduate programs because our graduate program or studies preceded many of these conversations, right? So we're here saying everybody who's up and coming needs to learn how to do all of these skills. However, we weren't taught how to do these skills. So we're a little bit like building the airplane as we go, which is why it is important that we look back and reference other fields who have done this important work already. And then we're kind of just adding on our own layers to it. Now, that's not to say that if you didn't already, or you didn't give specific training in how to be an empathetic and compassionate provider, that you cannot already be one. Many, many people are already just quite naturally compassionate and empathetic providers. But these are also skills that one can learn how to do better at. So everybody can learn how to do better at one of these types of things. And it may be something that once you kind of draw one's attention to it and you have a chance to role play it and practice it in maybe a little less stressful setting than your very first parent interview, let's say, you can become more comfortable in these skills, and knowing what they are is going to help you to become better at it. So everybody, old, young, new, not so new, can benefit from reviewing and thinking about what are the skills that I have in this arena of empathetic and compassionate practices, and what are the skills that I might need to build up. And then also, how am I going to approach reviewing this, talking about this, and then teaching this to my own supervisees and trainees, such that moving forward, this is an built-in, woven in part of the conversations and the trainings that we provide, both in our field as we're providing services, and then for our supervisees as we're training them up to become BCBAs.
Absolutely. And that leads so perfectly into my article. And probably yours as well. And I am going to review the Cannon and Gould article of 2022, where they use my most favorite thing, a clicker.
Yep.
So they can train up these complex skills. Man, do I love clicker training. I'm just going to say it. I love it so much. I have tried to do my own research using clicker training. It has been challenging. So I really commend any human application of clicker training that we can do. And spoiler alert, one of the participants in my study asked to take the clicker home with him because he liked the sound so much.
That's so fun.
I know, right? Like, can you imagine? He'd be like, can I just take that home? And I just imagine that participant lying in bed and being like, click, click, and then like smiling and drifting off to sleep. That's what I was thinking about.
I do like the sound as well.
It's nice. It's
you can
very
recreate
nice
it with the Snapple cap too.
Yeah,
do they still sell Snapples? That was hard to say.
Oh yeah, you can. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can still buy Snapples. Okay. But you can also just get a clicker too. I have so many. You can just come over. I just have them all over the place. I have them in every room of our house, even though we no longer use them. But I have them everywhere. Okay, let me tell you about my study. In the introduction, they do a really thorough research review of like up and coming BCBAs and, the state of our field, which we've talked about a lot of times. And they make that really good point that I think, Diana, you made in the introduction of this episode, is that we are really good at teaching technical skills to our graduate students and our up and coming workforce, but it might not be enough to then produce great client outcomes, right? So you can be very technical, but that doesn't mean that you're going to be really successful. And when I read that, I was like, so true. I had a doctor a few years ago that was the smartest person I think I've ever met. She was like so incredibly smart. She had like so many research reviews. She was like very in depth in the topic, but man, her bedside manner was horrendous.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
So it made it really hard for me to talk to her, express my concerns, right? And then she would just tell me an answer, and then I didn't feel like we could have a back and forth there. And so I think that really parallels. Eventually, I got through to her, and now we're besties. But I think that really parallels our new practitioners in the field that haven't had that less technical training on like soft skills and collaboration and relationship building, because they can just go in and be like, I know what I'm doing. I know. Full disclosure, I did that as well as a first year BCBA, right? I know what I'm doing. Here's what we're going to do. I'm just going to tell you and you're going to do it, right? And so I think it's really important that we start incorporating these relationship building skills into not only the curriculum of graduate programs, which thankfully the new task list gives us a little bit of that, and the supervision curriculum gives us a little bit of that, but also incorporating that within workforces, because not everyone is going to be part of a graduate program. Many supervisors that are older than the 2022 task list may not have received training on how to teach these skills or even on these skills themselves, right? They might have learned through trial and error with bad parent meetings or bad client interactions. And so it might be difficult to know where and how to start teaching these to their supervisees, even though I know that's really important. And, recent research suggests that only half of the students that were in fieldwork in 2019 received any sort of discussion on this type of relationship building. So we've got our work to do, right? And when they did a survey, they actually showed that graduate students scored the lowest on behavioral artistry. And so behavioral artistry is the ability to make connections, relationships, to demonstrate effective communication and interpersonal skills, right? And you don't want that, right? Because they're the future of our field. And they're the ones basically are in our direct line between parents and clients. So when I saw that, I was like, ouch, I can see it though, right? We really focus on those technical skills and not so much on those interpersonal skills that can really make or break client outcomes and client relationships. And we already talked about outside the field, there's an abundance of research to suggest that there's better treatment outcomes with this relationship building. They see that people do better when physicians have empathy, they have better treatment adherence, and they have better outcomes when there's therapeutic alliance. I love that word. And it's like one of the
sounds very Star Trek-y.
Behavioral
therapeutic alliance.
Right? Therapeutic alliance. And I love that because I think we could also use that term. And we could steal that from the medical field. And I think it reminds us when you write it in bold and italic, be like, make sure you have therapeutic alliance, that you are communicating and working with as a team with the parents or the clients that you're serving. And so with that therapeutic alliance, we see that there's better outcomes. Also, from our behavioral standpoint, we know that when we're training skills, if we are not providing feedback, it's less likely that behavior is going to change, right? People are just going to be doing the same thing. And so my favorite clicker training does provide that feedback. And most of the time when you're trained on clicker training effectively, it will deliver the feedback immediate through a short click, or either right immediately after the behavior or concurrently with the behavior, because it's so easy, right? It's much quicker than verbal feedback. It's much less to process. It's just like a little, right? And then that can signal that the behavior was correct. And I just love that. Participants can then continue responding. They don't have to stop. They don't really have to process, right? Like with the words. And so I think it allows for a more seamless and less intrusive observation period where you can mark and provide that instant feedback for correct responding. And we know that clicker training has been used in sports and fitness, in animal training, obviously, but less in healthcare settings. They talked that previous research used clicker training to improve gait with children with autism, improve daily living skills, and looking at equivalence relations. And most of those times, clicker training is a part of a larger treatment to increase target skills. And so it really has been shown to be very effective with those simple, discrete skills that you can just look at and then click, and then you can increase or maintain those skills. But it really hasn't been looked at experimentally on these more complex responses. So the purpose of the study that I'm going to talk about is to evaluate clicker training along with role play and instruction. So it's basically BST with clicker training.
Yeah.
Yep. They don't say that, but it is. On building these foundational relationship skills. So this part I found a little bit saucy, the participant section, which you don't usually find the participant section very saucy, but I did.
Juicy.
I know. So the study was at a small ABA agency in the U.S., and the agency had in-home, clinic-based, and community-based services. And then the participants were employees that might benefit from this type of training due to observations, feedback, performance reviews, and their 90-day evals. So I thought that was kind of spicy. They also said that if employees wanted to, they indicated that they self-selected themselves, that they could do this. I just thought that was funny. They're like, hey, we want to teach this skill. Let's go back and look at all of our employees and pick some.
Oh, goodness.
Saucy, a little saucy. So they approached 6 total employees.
Well, at least they had data, I'll just say.
Yeah, no, they absolutely had data. Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's really what we should be doing, is we should be taking data so that we know where folks need to improve. And then they had a system that they were putting in place so that people could improve. So that's what was going on.
Yeah, that's true. I know. But so another thing I also appreciate, I thought that part was saucy, but I also appreciate this part, is that they told them that they don't have to participate. If they don't want to participate, that's totally fine. They'll receive their same supervision that they were already receiving. So they're probably going to get some supervision on these type of skills anyway, but they don't have to participate in the study. So they approached 6 people. 4 people said yes, so 2 people opted out. What they said, which was totally fine. And then 2 of the 4 participants actually baselined out of the skills. And so they weren't included in the study. So we only have two participants in this study. But so interesting that those 2 participants, we don't really know anything more about them. But what we do know is that it's probably a motivational issue and not a skill-based deficit, right? Potentially, right? Because they based out. And so they eventually had 2 participants. The participants also surprisingly were graduate level students that had just graduated and were eligible to sit for the BCBA exam. And I was also surprised that they were 27 to 32 and been in the field for 8 to 11 years.
Wow.
Right?
That's so long. Yeah.
That's so long. Usually it's like they're 20 and they've been in the field for 2 months. But not these participants. They are invested. They are invested in behavior analysis. They've been in it for a long time. But they didn't have any prior training on relationship building or any prior clicker training experience. So that's good to know. So in the main experimenter was the clinical director at the agency, and that was the trainer, and because that's who typically would conduct trainings. And they also had a research assistant, and I put RA, and I always want to say resident advisor, but it's research.
Going back to your college days, right? There.
That person was always present and hired full-time by the agency, but had not worked with the participants in the past, and they served as the person in all of the scenarios, right? So they were trained by the clinical director, and they ran through all the scripts and stuff. So the trainings were conducted in the training room, and they were all videotaped. And so here's one of the interesting parts is that the behaviors that they measured were percent of opportunities for engaging in the target skills. And the skills were chosen based on motivational interviewing literature, observation, feedback from families, and the ACT literature. So here they are. This is something that I think is revolutionary for our field, these complex skills.
Okay.
Mindful reflecting is the first one. And they defined that as naming the non-vocal behavior of the participant, naming the content and the function, and then paraphrasing what's happening. So that's not something we would typically see, right? And so their example is, it seems like it's hard to talk about your song's progress. I noticed you just changed the subject right now. So that would be an example of mindful reflecting, would be helpful. The second one is asking questions with curiosity, manning for information of current experience, including private and public events, manding for information on current goals, expectations, and then expanding on previous concerns in the absence of judgment. That one seems a little bit harder to define, right? Because how do you categorize the absence of judgment?
Right. Yeah.
And then the third one is,
because honestly, like even saying like, "Hey, you just changed the subject," that seems like
a little
maybe
judgy.
It's not judgment. I don't know. I feel like it's like a little judgy. Maybe I'm not fully grasping. I would have a hard time doing that one personally.
You would definitely have a hard time doing that. Yeah. And then the last one was actually the hardest skill of all, and this one's called appreciating. And this I actually took directly from the text because it was difficult to paraphrase. And it included any instance of the participating responding by verbally acknowledging how difficult it was to talk about experiences or providing potential positive reinforcement for willingness to approach difficult private events. So that one, I think it's like, I appreciate that you're sharing this with me. And, I acknowledge that this must be hard for you. That seems hard.
Yeah. It does. But knowing Evelyn Gould and having talked to her, she can do all these things.
Oh, 100%, right?
Yeah. And I'm sure Dr. Cannon can as well. I just don't know them.
Yeah. Okay. So how they taught this was through simulated role plays where the RA, research assistant, not resident advisor, played a hypothetical client or a parent or a colleague. And they ran through a variety of different scenarios where they could map out all of these skills. And the scenarios included a parent wanting to talk about a lack of progress with their student, a colleague feeling burnt out at work, or a colleague discussing ways to better manage conflict at work. So these are the different scenarios that they use and that behavior analysts may come in contact. So one scenario was presented with each session, and there was a total of 30 response opportunities, so 10 for each skill. And what I love is that each of the sessions were not scripted. So they had one discriminative stimuli that they provided at the beginning, and then however it played out, which is, I think, a little more naturalistic than being like, and then you say, and then I will say, right?
Like, this is not planned out, what you and I are saying either.
100% no.
Very organic.
Yep. Very organic. And so each session continued until all 30 were completed. Sociability was conducted later, where they asked about how they liked it on a Likert scale. They were asked to define the target responses, give examples, as well as how much they liked clicker training. You know, I love good IOA and PI. Those were great. And then they experimentally looked at the study using a multiple baseline across skills. So they included baseline training, post-training, and generalization probes. And like I said before, prior to the study, the research assistant received training on conducting the study and all the scenarios by the clinical director. And during baseline, the trainer picked a random scenario, gave it to the the research assistant on a clipboard, and then instructed the RA. I'm just going to say RA so I don't keep screwing it up.
Okay.
To say, every day you work as a behavior analyst, you encounter situations where parents, staff, or coworkers want to talk to you about their concerns. I want you to interact with the hypothetical client, staff, peer presented to you in your usual way. So that was the instructions. Then they were given 4 different scenarios so that all 30 opportunities could occur, and this happened between 10 and 30 minutes, and that was baseline. So not surprising, the 2 participants scored fairly low in baseline across all of the 3 skills. Then training was so simple. They just gave them the definitions of the 3 words, gave them examples, and then they said, okay, you have 3 minutes to read this over. I'm going to ask you to demonstrate these skills. And if you do them correctly, I'm going to provide feedback via a click. That's it. They did not receive any other feedback on performance. So they weren't told what they did wrong. They weren't asked to do anything else. That's it. Just the click on correct performance. And then once they met mastery criteria, they went into a post-training phase, which was the exact same as baseline, except instead of saying that you do this every day, do what you would normally do, they just say, use your skills. That one I also thought was fun, right? They're not trying to be like, now do what I just told you to do, but they're like, use the skills we just taught you. But they don't say, we just taught you, just say, use your skills.
I love it.
And then following post-training, they had some generalization probes that were the same as baseline with novel scenarios. These are really nice graphs if you want to look at a multiple baseline design graph that shows, a pretty great functional control, because for the one participant, the first participant they talk about, it is for Peter. Peter's the one that loves that clicker. Baseline was really, really low. In training, they met mastery criteria in like 2 to 4 sessions, which is pretty good. And then the sad thing is, though, they in post-training, they were higher than baseline for all of the sessions, actually, but did not meet mastery criteria for Peter. So they were higher than baseline, but it was on a decreasing trend. And you saw the similar results for Katie, which is the second participant. They don't say much about Katie. She was probably just run-of-the-mill participant. They gave a lot of information about Peter, but not as much about Katie. I wonder if she felt left out. But again, for her, 1 to 4 sessions in training before she met mastery criteria for all of the sessions. And then generally higher levels of responding than baseline. But again, in that one of the skills, the appreciating skills, we saw lower levels of responding. So what we can say about this is that it was effective for training these really complex skills, which is pretty neat. But we needed a little bit more, I think, to maintain the skills. The author suggested that maybe they could have done booster sessions. They also throw shade at the participants a little bit, I think, is that...
Oh, no.
Not really, but a little bit, because they were like, because it took so quick in training in order to engage in the skills. They think they probably already had those skills in their repertoire already, right? At least to some extent, because in some instances, there's only one training session. So there has to have been something there. But they did note that the hardest skill for both participants was appreciating. And that one, although they met mastery criteria in that generalization and post-training phase, they saw a decreasing trend almost to close to baseline levels. And they said that might likely be because the definition is a little too similar to other definitions. They said that the definitions had overlap, so that might be something that they could look at. Another thing they mentioned, which might be interesting to see if it helped to increase behavior over time, is to fade the clicker training from a dense schedule of reinforcement, or thin the schedule of reinforcement from a dense, CR1 to more intermittent schedule through the post-training phase to see if they could, evoke behavior change for longer. And then one of the other things I wanted to bring up is that one of the participants, Peter, expressed anxiety over the trial and error method, right? Because he didn't know if he was doing something wrong. He really wanted to get it right, and he wasn't sure. So that's something to take into consideration, right? And maybe as clicker training could be part of a wider treatment package where we provide positive and corrective feedback just so that people know what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's all.
That's it.
Okay. That's it, man. No, that's all really interesting. And I wonder, it is interesting that they didn't maintain the skills, also given that it was like a relatively short study.
Yeah.
I think you might be right. It may be that they're like, oh, that's what you wanted me to do. And then they did it initially, and then it just didn't maintain, which would say to me that the underlying motivation wasn't really present here. And you have to wonder, is that because it was, obviously it was like a role play scenario. So it wasn't real. There weren't real clients, right? And they're like, yeah, I know how to do this skill and I'll use it in real life, but I'm not going to bother to do it right now.
Right.
So perhaps it is, the decreasing trend that we saw is kind of an artifact of the, fake nature. I wanted to use a better word, fake nature of the study itself. But if that's the case, then, and they kind of quote unquote had the ability to do these skills outside of the study, then why weren't they already doing them? And how would we know if they were to use them in a real life scenario unless we had those data instead, right? Well, artificial. That's the word I wanted to use.
Artificial, yeah.
I just couldn't think of it. So gathering some data outside of the, research context, I think could have been really helpful here to see.
I agree.
If the participants would have used the skills that they quote unquote already had, or maybe learned in the study in a more high stakes context, perhaps. I don't know. We don't know because we don't have those data.
We don't. But I do love that there's data, right? And they're using evidence-based procedures to try to teach really complex skills. So I just love that. I'm going to try to replicate this study and address their limitations.
That was my other comment was going to be, these skills, even when I read them, I'm like, oh, I don't know that I would click correctly as the experimenter in these scenarios, because they just seem hard. They just seem complicated. And like there's so, within each of the skills, there's kind of a lot of stuff going on too.
And I'm no Evelyn Gould, so
I know, if
I can replicate it, then, and that's one of the things she said, look at the definition. So maybe I'll replicate it. Maybe that'll be my new dream project.
Yeah, it's a really cool study, but
thanks, Cannon and Gould.
Nice work, guys. But yeah, that's what I'm saying is maybe maybe if they broke it down into some smaller skills or had some additional types of training, like you were saying, to kind of help that along. Maybe that was a skill that the participants didn't continue to do because it was complicated, and they kind of felt like, I got to focus on the first two. If I don't get the third one, it's okay. Right. Or something. We don't really know. I'm obviously conjecturing here, but perhaps that I would like to see it replicated so we could know, is there more breakdown to do of that? Because these are really complicated. These are not things that you just learn by reading a checklist and hearing a couple clicks, right?
No.
Like, I think that there is a lot to all of this, and I'd like to continue to see more in this line of work so we can like really like figure out like what's the best way to approach this and what are the motivating factors here to have this maintain and generalize.
Yeah. And one thing I forgot to mention that they put in the discussion, which I thought was interesting, is that they suggest that it was likely just providing the definition and examples that led to an increase in performance rate, because they saw such an immediate change from baseline to training. But they said it's likely that clicker training maintained that behavior, right? Because you wouldn't know if you were doing it right without that feedback. So I thought that was cool.
Interesting.
And now it's time for our first break. And with that first break is our first secret code word. It is my most favorite flower, the daisy. That's spelled D-A-I-S-Y. Daisy.
Yay!
We'll be right back.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu. See you there!
Oh, hey, we're back now. You thought we were gone, but we're back. And we're here to talk more about supervisees.
We're nailing this.
We are nailing it.
Okay. Yes, we are back. We're back. I'm going to talk about Rohr and Weiss 2023. You may say to yourself, did we already talk about this article in a different episode? But we didn't. We talked about Rohr and Weiss 2021. And I'll tell you about that in the pairing section, but we also will reference it a little bit here. So this is the follow-up. This is the one that when we talked about that first article, we say, and now we want data. Here are the data. They're here. And this is a really freaking awesome study. So I'm so excited that I get to talk about it. The intro will not come as a surprise to you. It says things like, we should all be engaging in culturally responsive and compassionate practices with families and clients that we serve. And this makes total sense because we are a forward-facing service provision field. And of course, we want to do right by our clients and we want to make sure that they like what we're doing. So we should be talking about this stuff all the time. And here we are talking about it. And that's good. This is tied into our ethics code. Again, like you said, Jackie, more and more as we move into different versions of the code, we see this reflected a little bit more strongly. And that is a good thing too. So this article is going to help us hopefully continue to build upon what we have in terms of the compassionate care strategies and talk about how we might actually implement teaching those. Now, as we've touched on, compassionate care strategies go by different names. We've seen it in our literature, in our field, throughout our history. But recently, we have some different articles that focus on it in different ways. You've already touched on them. Relationship building, the Cannon and Gould article you just talked about. Here it is, mentioned in this article. Behavioral artistry, which you also referenced. The article they pull from for that was Callahan and colleagues, 2019. And then certainly cultural humility. We've talked about that in varying contexts as well. So the series of articles by Lauren Bolio and Karina Jimenez Gomez, as well as Elizabeth Hughes Fong's articles, all talk about either cultural humility, cultural responsiveness. And there's clear overlap between the skills that are going to be in the cultural responsiveness realm and the compassionate care realm, right? All of these are soft skills that have to do with we as the clinician ensuring that we're hearing our clients, we're responding well to them and their needs, and we're tailoring the services that we are providing to that individual client, their cultural background, and their particular family's needs, right? So it's all tied in together here. So this article focuses, and they didn't mention soft skills, but I also think that like Taylor and colleagues talk about soft skills too. Maybe I just didn't write it down and I skipped over it. I don't know. Anyway, so we want to figure out if we have a solid approach for teaching these skills, and then ultimately, do we have appropriate skills in place that we're going to see improvement in outcome, right? Are these going to benefit our clients and their view of the services that we're providing? That's kind of like a stretch goal here. Right now, we just want to see, can we teach them? That's our first step. 4 participants were in this study. They were all participating in an online master's program. They were generally in their first year of the program. And this one, we didn't have a range of ages like we did in yours, Jackie. They were all either 24 or 25, which is like prime time age for being in a master's program. 3 of them identified as female, 1 identified as male, and they all had backgrounds in psychology or education for their bachelor's degree, but they hadn't yet taken courses in ABA in ethics or collaboration. That our authors specifically wanted that crew because they hadn't perhaps yet learned some of the skills that we're going to be focused on in the study. And to participate, they, needed to want to participate, certainly, first of all, and they needed to score at least below 70% on one of the DV measures in order to be included here. So they actually had 2 other participants that were screened out because they could already perform most of these skills, which was great for them, but their data are obviously not shown. This was, once again, a COVID times study. So everything was conducted via Zoom. Everything was recorded via Zoom, which was quite convenient for them because they were able to use those videos later to get some additional social validity measures, which is kind of cool. So put a pin in that. And they had a couple of dependent variables. The first one was our as a behavior analyst, our bread and butter variable here, which was the performance for the participants on a checklist of skills that encompassed a compassionate care approach to specifically conducting an intake interview. They took this list of skills from the Rohr and Weiss 2021 list that they made in that article called the Compassionate Collaboration Tool, which had a list of 25 different skills. And so here they kind of pulled out the 11 that they saw as being most related to this interviewing process, and they broke them down into 3 skill sets. So I'm now going to tell you what all of those 11 skills were in the 3 skill sets. Skill set number 1 was what they called basic interviewing skills, and it included 4 things. 1, telling the caregiver that you're taking notes. 2, nodding. 3, back channeling, which meant saying, or or yeah. And 4, providing a positive introduction, which kind of seems like it would go first, but whatever. They listed that one number 4. Skill set number 2, showing interest in the family. So this included 1, acknowledging the child's abilities or efforts. 2, asking about the child's interests. 3, asking about parent priorities. And 4, reflection and incorporation of parent priorities. And finally, skill set number 3, which is called joining with the family. And that included 1, making an empathy statement. 2, what they called normalizing, which meant reflecting that other people have similar experiences. And number 3, what was called partnering, which was making collaborative statements about how you were going to work together. Okay, Jackie's nodding. She's on board.
That sounds good. That sounds like great skills.
Her nodding and back channeling skills.
What? Yeah.
Okay. And then if you want to reference in the article, they give an awesome table number 2, which gives actual operational definitions for all these things I just named, as well as examples. Gotta love it. It's one of those sideways tables. You gotta turn the paper sideways. It's one of those.
I love those. I love those.
I love them too. And you might wonder, how did they establish this list? I already told you they used the Compassionate Collaboration Tool, but in addition to that, they also surveyed parents of individuals with developmental disabilities and asked them, what would you want your BCBA to do to make you feel comfortable and included? And then they also conducted role plays with experienced clinicians in both ABA and psychology to see what they did in like a mock intake interview, and ensured that they included all the components of what that person did as well. And then they had this secondary measure. For us, it would be a secondary measure because it's pulled from other fields, and it was called the Jefferson Scale of Physician Empathy Health Professions version. And they talk a lot about this in the article, and they were mostly saying like this, so far this has some good evidence that it may be a tool that could be quite useful. It's a self-survey, but is looking to see like how do you rate your own empathy skills, as far as my understanding of it was. They talk about how it might be something that they could continue to further utilize, provide more operational definitions related to it. It seemed like it was sensitive to changes over time, et cetera. So they thought it was cool, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And then just like you, Jackie, here we had an MBL, multiple baseline design across skill sets too.
I love it. I mean, that's how I have to do it. So I have to do it.
Yeah. And so very similar layout to what you had. We had a baseline session. They did training sessions. They did post BST probes because, spoilers, this is also BST with video modeling, not tag teach, but video modeling instead. And then generalization / maintenance at the end. Okay.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, cool. So in baseline, again, this is all via Zoom. I wrote down what they said because I don't know, I just kind of like enjoy these. So it said, today we're going to do a brief interview activity where you will be the clinician and interview a caregiver, me and my child. I won't be able to answer questions about the interview itself, but we will chat after about the interview and skills we are looking at. You will treat this as an intake interview and identify the top 3 things to focus on in treatment. Don't worry too much about what exactly you say. Just think of this as an opportunity to get to know the child and family. And then they put up a screen that had like a mock child and parent information, like their name, their age, their diagnosis, etc. And then they just said, do your best. And that was the baseline. So everybody got 3 of those. Just for reference, those were like 4 to 11 minutes each. And then from there, of course, the participants that were in the study were the ones that didn't do all of the interview, the 3 skill set interview components. So they moved on into training. Everybody got the skill sets in the same order. But if you look at it, it makes sense, right? Because skill set 1 is like super basic. So they kind of have to start there. And then so everyone got sets 1, 2, and 3. They conducted BST with video modeling of the skills. And here's what they said in the context of doing this training. Okay. Today, we will learn about certain compassionate responses when interacting with caregivers. I've selected some skills we will focus on, and you will receive training on these skills. You will also write down the skills we discuss so that you can refer back to them while we work together. Please feel free to reference these notes as frequently as you need to. The reason we're focusing on these skills is that a lot of research shows that when people have better relationships with their therapists, the overall outcomes are improved. This can be achieved through showing empathy and compassion. It can help caregivers and families feel that we have a better understanding of who their child is as a person, as well as what their family needs. When this happens, caregivers might implement procedures better, and there may be an overall better relationship between the family and you as the practitioner. When we are engaging via telehealth, there are some skills that are even more important because we're not seeing the parent in person, and so we may need to be more deliberate. For example, nodding or paralanguage skills like First, I will outline the skills that we will learn. Then we will watch a model of someone engaging in the skills. I might pause the video so I can point out each skill. Then we will practice the skills in role play, with you playing the clinician and me playing the caregiver. After, I will give you feedback on how you did with the skills, and we'll keep practicing as needed. I don't know. I just like that, right?
I like it too.
It just gives me like such a better idea of like what actually happened in the study instead of me just being did BSD. Because here you're seeing the rationale as well, right? And I wanted our listeners out there to hear this because it's a really nice model of how one might talk to a supervisee to explain why these are important skills, why we want to be focusing on compassion and empathy, why we want to be building relationship skills with families, etc. I just feel like the more that this is built in from the beginning of conversations with trainees on the importance of this, the more that everyone's going to see this as just an integral part of service provision. It's not something that should get tacked on later. It's not something that's like, oh, we did the whole task list, and oh, down here at the bottom, there's a section on compassionate care, and now we should talk about that, right? It should be built in from the beginning as part of what we're doing. And these articles are just great examples of how, hey, we can do this. We can operationally define these. We can measure them. And this is something that you as the trainee, we're going to talk about again and again and again. And this is your behavior that we're measuring and we're working to make changes on, just like the way in which we would approach making changes for a client's behavior for something that they find meaningful. So I just like that as an example. So that's why you got it. Then, so yeah, we did that. We taught all the 3 skills, and that went just as you might expect it to, because BST is amazing.
It's the best.
After each skill set, remember there are 3 skill sets. They did a post BST probe basically to see how everybody did. And then after all 3 skills were taught, then they did a maintenance or they did both, maintenance and generalization. After 2 weeks, the generalization ones were new scenarios. So up until this point, they were kind of like rehashing the same scenario, but then the generalization one with novel caregiver scenario. They had social validity like out the wazoo. They did a participant survey and got the participants' opinion on how they did on everything. And then they also used the video clips, right? Remember I said, they recorded these. They then used those recordings and showed them to 2 groups of experts. They had professional experts who were folks who had both BCBAD and clinical psychology backgrounds and had been working in the field for 20 plus years. So it's like no joke. And then they had consumer experts as well, which were 3 parents of individuals with autism. And so they provided each of them with short video clips and had them rate them on a whole host of measures in terms of how they felt like the interviews went. So the results, if you're ready to hear some results, the graphs.
I'm so ready.
Okay. They were really beautiful because BST graphs are almost always beautiful. You don't see the training data, you just see the post data. So it's like baseline was low. And then post BST training was high. And
I wish they would show us the training data.
I think it's, I don't know. Yeah, you hardly ever see it. Yeah, I know.
But I wish that people at least left it in a table or like just told us how long it took.
Yeah.
But
yes,
anyway.
totally how long it took would be good, or like how many go-throughs of the role play and the feedback you needed to get, because like you always end up at 100% because you're doing it repeatedly, but how long did it take? That would be good information to have. But anyway, across all 4 participants, it looked really great. For 2 of them, they did start to see some creeping up in baseline in panel 3, which kind of makes sense when you like look at it a little bit more. Those 2 participants were also the ones who had some skills already. So they were at or near the 70% level for skill number 1 when they started the study. So they perhaps were kind of a little bit further along in their learning of these skills than participants 1 and 2 were. So that's just something to know. But it did not, to me, impact my interpretation of the data indicating that they had strong functional control in the study. And then they got the social validity data from the participants, which was very high. Everyone said this was super effective. I liked this. I would use it again. I would have someone else learn via this method to engage in compassionate care practices. So that was super high and looked great. And then for the professional and consumer raters, it also looked good. I want to find the questions. I didn't write them down, of course. So the professional and consumer raters rated them on, did they show sincere concern for caregivers and their needs? Did they show compassion and empathy for the caregiver? Did they make an effort to get to know the family? Did they show attentive and engaged listening? Did they ask about the caregiver's priorities? Did they incorporate the caregiver's priorities? And did they make an effort to establish a collaborative relationship? Okay. So they're, obviously like softish things that they were measuring. And overall, everyone scored, 5 to 7 on a 7-point scale on these. They didn't do pre-post. It was just post. The professional raters rated them a slightly bit lower than the consumer raters did, but overall, everyone was pretty generous. Participant 4 did average a good bit lower than the other participants. So they only scored in the 3 to 6 range across all skills, across both sets of raters, while everyone else was basically in the 6 to 7 range. So that's just something to note there. And then, in their limitations, they do go into that a little bit. I wrote down the quote. They said the qualitative nuances with respect to the execution of these skills are less easily explained, which is fair. I think it's, for it's like, is the je ne sais quoi of it all, right? Like, you can do the things on the checklist, but sometimes they're just still like little minute ways in which you're interacting, or your facial expressions, your orientation, or your pausing, or your intonation, or your inflection. All of those like tiny little pieces can add up to a more, qualitatively caring presentation or slightly less. And that's just really hard to capture, even with the level of nuance that they were attempting here in the study. Sometimes it's just still hard to capture. So I feel like that for participant 4, for whatever reason, that was a little bit harder for them to capture that piece. But the study got really great results. Overall, awesome place for us to start and continue in this line of research in showing how we can teach compassionate care skills to trainees.
I love it. We really took that one home.
Yeah, brought it on home.
And so now I think it's time for our dissemination station. Here we are.
We're here.
We made it.
A little bit lighter. We don't have as much
a little
luggage.
bit lighter. We're crying right now. We miss Rob. We miss Rob so much. Yeah, so what do we need to do? More research. That's what we need to do.
Yeah. In our Denegri et al. Article, that was the one that we didn't talk about yet, and that was one that Rob prepared.
Poor Rob.
For a conversation, I know, for today. If you guys want to go check it out, it is a really good article, and it has got so much stuff in it. In this article, they're, trying to help us think about compassionate care, big picture. So what is the overarching framework for us to interpret compassionate care from in a way that's going to be meaningful for us to then actually make a change, right? And do some implementation in our specific field. If you want to go visit this article, I definitely recommend looking at Table 1 and then Figure 1, which kind of goes with Table 1. So Table 1 breaks it down for us into varying goals that we can have according to different levels within our field, pretty much. So they give us leadership goals to think about, supervisor goals, and then therapist goals, and how to take kind of like actionable steps within each of those areas. So leadership goals, they talk about we should have goals for creating and supporting the process of prompting self-compassion, compassionate care, psychological flexibility, and perspective taking, and some actions for these. So this is like if you're in charge, if you're like the big dogs, right? Like what should you be doing in your organization or your agency to ensure that these compassionate care goals are able to be implemented? And so it's things such as acknowledging requests around self-compassionate actions, like extending deadlines, normalizing self-care by, let's say, turning off notifications after work hours and making sure that you're telling other supervisors in your agency that it's okay to do this. More opportunities for feedback and both reception of it, being positive in that way, and giving positive feedback too, and making policy changes based on feedback, right? So those are like leadership goals that could be built in to create a caring environment. On the level of supervisors, they said what we would want to see is that supervisors are modeling, promoting, and supporting self-compassion, compassionate care, all the same ones, psychological flexibility, perspective taking, etc. This could be demonstrated by modeling self-care, reinforcing staff's self-care actions, checking in with supervisees, while looking at what their therapeutic goals might be through a compassionate lens, giving feedback, modeling empathy, right? All of those components that we've kind of been talking about throughout. And then as a therapist, what goals might be in this realm as for compassionate care would be to value client experiences. I feel like that should really be for everybody, right?
Always,
but it's meant to be like, it's a bottom up, top down, it's both, right? Valuing client experiences, using compassionate care maintaining good therapeutic relationships. Once again, that psychological flexibility gets thrown in, taking the perspectives of others, providing authentic care. And they said examples of these would be advocating for inclusive goals, reviewing functions of behavior before responding to distressing situations, practicing self-reflection around challenging thoughts and feelings, and mindful engagement with a client. So I kind of like love the therapist goal ones.
Yeah.
I know that they're all important. I feel like the therapist ones are ones that everyone should be practicing. They're also ones that would be awesome to review with a trainee to think about how they might be engaging in those now, or what opportunities they might have to engage in those now, and maybe even helping them set a goal for themselves if these are areas that they would like to see change occurring in their agency, perhaps, right? Like thinking about ways in which they can, speak up and build in those opportunities at their own level. Although again, like this should not be the responsibility of therapists to make change all the way up. It should be that the organization is working down, but this is a process for everyone to be working on together.
I agree. Woo, I love it.
I have to say about that. Yeah, so go check it out. It's a great article, and that was Table 1 is what I just reviewed for us there. Other thoughts you have?
I just
dissemination thoughts?
Yeah, dissemination thoughts. I think that it will be important for our field as we continue to expand on this is to have really good, concrete operational definitions. And I think understand that these are skills that need to be learned and that are not just, part of our field, right? Like, oh, you're in the field, you must have these skills. You must be patient. You must be, right? Like when people say that, I think recognizing that just like our technical skills, we should be breaking these skills down as well and providing immediate and frequent and lots of opportunities to engage in these skills. That's what I think.
Sounds great. My takeaway is these articles are great. Like they're the next step in the process, right? So we talked about like why this is important. Now we're talking about can we teach it? And then next we need to see is the way in which we're attempting to teach this producing the outcomes that we are expecting.
That's nice. Yeah, I didn't think about that. But of course, right?
Both of our studies were hypothetical, right? They were role play. So we need to see next is if we are engaging in these practices and we're teaching people how to engage in these, is everyone feeling that we're doing a good job? Are we hitting all of those social validity, the 3-part measures from Wolf in a way that feels satisfactory? Right. And there are so many skills that go into this soft skills repertoire. So this is just scratching the surface. We need to see this replicated in varying capacities across many, many, many different skills that would fit into this arena. So there's much work to be done, but it's an exciting step in that direction. And it absolutely should be happening from the get-go, built into our supervisory practices for up-and-coming BCBs.
Agencies as well.
Yeah.
It should be part of agencies, even if you're not going to be a BCBA. Even if you're just going to work at an agency and you're not going to go to school and you're just going to do it for a few years and then do something else. Should be embedded.
Awesome. Okay.
Great. And now we're at the part of the show that's called pairings.
Yay! Okay, time for pairings. Pairings is when I tell you about other episodes you might want to check out if you liked this episode. We have an extensive back catalog of episodes, almost 300. We're like inching up on the number 300 here, which is pretty amazing. So here are a few. You could go all the way back to episode 5, where we talk about tag teach for the first time, if you want to learn more about that. You could check out episode 82, in which we discuss interview skills with Rocio Rosales. You could check out episode 132, where we break down behavior skills training and its components. You could definitely listen to episode 214, where we talk about compassionate care skills with both Dr. Jessica Rohr and Dr. Mary Jane Weiss. And you could also check out episode 255. We talk about scope of comfort with Andrea Steele Green, which is a really interesting convo.
That conversation really changed my life.
Yeah.
It really did. So
it's a good one. Yeah, I know. I think about it often. Episode 65 was titled Behavior Skills Training for All. That's a supervision episode as well. So we touch on some similar topics. You could hear Dr. Evelyn Gould talk in episode 151, ACT in the Time of COVID, which is all about interacting with families. And 2 more. Episode 244, moving from ABA student to ABA practitioners. We did that with the Babbitt student group. Remember that?
That was fun.
Yeah. And finally, I was like, where did we talk about Taylor? And it was in the episode with Dr. Adityan Rajaraman and Dr. Jen Austin, 204, trauma-informed care in behavior analysis.
Great.
Yeah. And don't forget, I also like to recommend a snack to go with the episode. The snack today is chicken soup and tea with honey. That one goes out to Rob. Feel better, Rob.
Feel better, Rob. And now that you are at the end of the episode, I bet you are wondering what our final secret code word is, and it is airplane. AAIRPLANE. Airplane.
There we go.
Yeah, you can
got it. We did it.
And so that leads us to the end of the episode. I want to give a big shout out to, let's see if I can do this, Dan Babbitt.
Of the podcast doctors.
Jim Carr for our interstitial music. Is that what it's called?
Our intro music.
Kyle's for our
Sturry.
Kyle for our is that the word that I'm looking for?
Yeah.
Intermediate. Our intermission.
Interstitial.
Music. Oh, that's a weird sound. And to ourselves for being here.
I guess, yeah.
And I think that's it. That's all we're thinking. And we hope that you come back next week when Rob will be here with us and we continue Supervision September and he can take over intro and outro. But until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye.